Hello everyone, welcome back to Hub and myself Dr. Jolsna, and here is the final session of our topic impression materials and procedures in fixed prosthodontics. So in the contents we have covered up to the types of different impression materials and also started discussing the techniques of impression making in our previous session. So among the techniques we have covered putty wash and dual phase impression techniques, and the next one to discuss is monophase impression technique. So before beginning, I request everyone to please do like and share my videos, and if you are new to this channel Hub, please do subscribe and support me. If you have any queries, any topic suggestions, any feedbacks, do comment below this video or you can mail me at this mail ID. So without any delay, let's start. The monophase impression technique, which is also called as single mix, single impression technique or single viscosity technique. So the procedure for monophase impression is same as that of dual phase impression technique, except that medium viscosity material is used both as the tray material and the syringe material. So a medium viscosity, that is regular body impression material, is placed in a custom tray with 3 mm spacer, and the surface reproduction may not be as good as that of a light body material in this technique. And also the medium viscosity material will show a greater amount of polymerization shrinkage than compared to the heavy body because of less amount of the filler content. So this single mix, single impression technique is usually done for medium body polyether and adhesion silicone, and when the material is forced through the syringe tip, it reduces its viscosity and records all details, while the tray material retains its medium viscosity. That's a shear thinning property. So this is about monophase impression technique. Coming to next technique, that is dual arch impression technique, also called as a triple tray technique, Checkbite or closed mouth impression technique. So this was introduced by Wilson and Verin, and as the name suggests, it records three things simultaneously. That is recording of tooth preparation with neighboring teeth, then the opposing antagonistic teeth, and the interocclusal relation. So this is a simple and accurate method for fabricating restoration using the conformative maxillomandibular relation. Now this technique uses a special triple tray that consists of a plastic framework with a plastic sieve and a handle. Now the tray should be first tried on the patient so that he is able to approximate his teeth after placement of the tray. And also the crossbar of the tray should be placed distal to the last tooth of the arch. So these things have to be taken care, and also you have to ensure that the patient's present occlusion is in maximum intercuspation. So rehearsal of closure into maximum intercuspal position is recommended before making the actual impression. Now the adhesive is applied onto the walls of the tray and the syringe material is injected into the area that is to be recorded. Now meanwhile the high viscosity material has to be mixed and loaded into the tray, and then the tray is placed between the arches and the patient is asked to occlude or bite slowly. After making the impression, the patient is instructed to open his mouth slowly, and as the patient opens his mouth, the tray will adhere to one arch. Now bilateral pressure should be applied to remove the tray as it helps to minimize distortion. Now the impression is poured and casts are prepared, and then articulation should be done on a hinge articulator with an incisal pin to maintain vertical dimension. Now in order to check the accuracy of the impression, you can observe the impression by passing a light through it, and you can see translucent areas at functional contact points. So this shows that your impression is accurate. So this is about the triple tray technique or the closed mouth impression technique. Now let's see the advantages and disadvantages of the triple tray technique. So advantages include less impression material required as only one part of the arch is recorded, and also less time is required because both arches are recorded simultaneously, and also we are recording the maximum intercuspation position, so and it is recorded accurately during function. Coming to disadvantages, distortion is possible because the tray is not rigid and it cannot be used for more than one casting per quadrant, and there is chance that there is uneven distribution of the impression material. The next one is hydrocolloid laminate technique. So we know the hydrocolloids agar and alginate, and this technique is a combination of the reversible agar with irreversible alginate hydrocolloid. So here agar is used in the form of a syringe material. So you can see here agar, it is used in form of syringe material and injected onto the area that is to be recorded, and then chilled alginate mix is taken in the stock tray and positioned on it. So here the alginate gels by chemical reaction, whereas the agar gels by means of contact with the cool alginate. And since the hydrocolloid in contact with the tissue surface is agar, it reproduces maximum surface details. Now coming to the advantages of this technique, it is more economical, there is good wettability, so there is a smooth dense model, and the surface reproduction is also satisfactory. And the disadvantages include chances of distortion as the agar gels from the outer surface towards the prepared teeth, and also the higher viscosity alginate can displace the agar hydrocolloid. So these are some of the disadvantages of this technique, and the bond between agar and alginate is not that sound. So higher viscosity alginate can displace agar hydrocolloid. So this is about hydrocolloid laminate technique. The next impression technique to discuss is the copper band or copper tube impression technique, wherein a copper band is positioned around the prepared tooth. Now this is indicated in single tooth preparation, also in cases of multiple preparation where the impression of one or two preparation have not been recorded properly. That is, there are only vague margins on one or two preparations. So in such cases we use copper band impression technique, and there are various combinations of copper band with different material. So usually the original one is copper band with modeling compound, and let us see how it is done. Now first, a copper band or tube is selected and customized according to the patient. So the band should be adapted well around the prepared tooth, and the area around the finish line should be trimmed and rounded off, and also an orientation hole should be made on the facial surface of the tube in order to identify the facial aspect. Now the impression compound is heated and then applied inside the copper tube, and then light body is syringed over the prepared tooth, and the surface of the impression compound is coated with adhesive and then seated over the impression material. So the finer details are recorded in the light body elastomer. Now, the advantages of this technique include it saves time as entire impression need not be repeated, and we get an accurate finish line. But the issue with this technique is that proper orientation of the die with the other dies, that is adjacent or opposing teeth, is difficult. So this is about copper tube impression technique. Coming to the next technique, that is impression using vacuum adapted splints, which was introduced by Antony LaForgia. So in this technique, we make impression of multiple abutment using vacuum adapted temporary splint material as a tray former. So Antony LaForgia used the temporary splint material in order to form the tray, and then after the preparation is completed, cold cure resin is mixed and inserted into the tray former. So cold cure acrylic resin is inserted into this vacuum adapted temporary splint material made tray former, and then this loaded resin tray is placed onto the prepared tooth. Okay, and then the cold cure acrylic resin was allowed to polymerize, and when the cold cure acrylic resin begins to set, that's approximately 1 minute, the tray is loosened and reseated repeatedly so that it will not adhere to the prepared teeth, and the temperature of the resin can be felt through the transparent tray former. So the resin may be firm enough to remove from the mouth before the hottest temperature is reached. Now following curing, the tray former is peeled away from the cured acrylic resin tray, and the surplus resin is removed, and also all internal surface is relieved except one stop that is retained on the occlusal area. So here is the occlusal stop. Other than that, both externally and internally it is reshaped. Now the thinner rubber base adhesive is applied to all surfaces of the tray and then allowed to dry, and then this tray is loaded with heavy body rubber base impression material, and then a primary impression is made. Now after the primary impression is made, it is removed from the abutments and all surplus impression material is cut from the margins. So you can see here it is cut from the margin, and the occlusal floor of the tray and all the pressure spots where acrylic resin shows through is also relieved with a number 8 round burr, And then all internal surfaces are relieved for final impression, and perforations are made on the occlusal and incisal surface to provide escape vents for the impression material. So this is the escape vent that is made on the occlusal surface for the impression material. Now this tray is filled with a mixture of equal parts of light and regular body rubber base impression material, either by means of syringe or spatula, and then positioned on the abutments in the tooth. Now after the material sets, again an overall impression is made in an oversized stock tray or individual acrylic resin tray using regular body rubber base impression material. So here you can see this is the oversized or stock tray or individual acrylic resin tray. Then here comes the cold cure resin. Then this is the heavy body, and the final material that is a mixture of light body and regular body. So this is Antony LaForgia's technique of making impression using vacuum adapted splints. The next technique is impression using preformed crown shells. So here a preformed polycarbonate crown is selected, and then the gingival margins and proximal contacts are adjusted according to the prepared teeth. That is, the crown should fit loosely over the tooth. Now coat the internal and external surface of the provisional crown shell with adhesive that's recommended by manufacturer, and then the elastomeric impression material is filled in the provisional crown shell, and while filling the crown, avoid air entrapment. Now seat the crown shell onto the prepared tooth until it covers the finish line, and then it is allowed to set, and finally a pickup impression is made using a regular body impression material in a complete arch stock tray. Coming to the next technique, that is functional checkbite impression technique by Edwin H. Getz. So as the name suggests, it is a combination of functional impression technique with checkbite impression. So the checkbite impression was made using unilateral checkbite impression tray with a medium body rubber base impression material. So this is same as that of the triple tray technique which we have already discussed. That is, it records three things simultaneously, that is the prepared teeth with the neighboring teeth, the antagonistic teeth, and the bite registration. So that's check bite impression. And then a functional impression is made after fabricating a temporary fixed partial denture that is made up of acrylic resin. So here this is the check bite impression tray. So after the check bite impression is made, the temporary restoration is removed from the mouth and the occlusal surface is reduced to allow addition of 1 to 2 mm of wax. So removal of temporary restoration and the occlusal surface is reduced around 1 to 2 mm in order to add wax, and on this wax we record the functional movements. So here first centric relation record is well established with a generous amount of wax, and then right and left lateral movements are carefully added one at a time, and when finished this chewing record is made on the reduced temporary restoration. It should reproduce the cusp of the opposing teeth in all of their functional movements. So this technique, that is a functional impression technique, we have already discussed in our full mouth rehabilitation session. So this is where all the functional movements of the opposing teeth are recorded on a wax that is placed on the prepared teeth. So here it is placed on the acrylic temporary fixed partial denture. Now the functionally generated path or the functional impression is recorded. The next procedure is the opposing teeth, that is upper teeth, used in developing this wax chewing record are dried and painted with hard fast setting acrylic resin, and meanwhile the lower wax chewing record is covered with a sheet of thin wet cellophane, and the patient is instructed to close in centric position. Now the acrylic on the upper teeth forms an accurate impression or index of the chewing record, and then the temporary restoration with the attached chewing record is removed from the mouth. Gingival retraction is done. Meanwhile the acrylic index adhering to the opposing teeth should be left undisturbed. Okay, and once the gingival displacement is achieved, the syringe and tray are filled with rubber based impression material, and then the impression is recorded, and the patient is asked to bite in centric position. Now the completed impression will contain the impression of abutment preparation and edentulous ridge on one side, and also the impression of the functional index on the other side. Okay, and then the impression material, once it is set, we remove it. So during this procedure, sometimes the acrylic index comes away from the opposing teeth, or it may be retained in the functional checkbite impression. But this is unimportant because it has served its purpose and can be discarded. So the use of acrylic index was that in order to replicate the functional chewing in the impression. Okay, and now this impression contains an accurate impression of the abutment preparation and edentulous ridge on one side of the tray and an impression of functional index on the other side of the tray. So when poured, the articulated cast will have a perfect relationship of the abutment and ridge, adjacent teeth, opposing teeth that is represented by perfectly positioned and related functional index. So this is called as functional check bite impression. So once it is completed, the wax can be removed from the temporary FPD and can be repositioned in the mouth with temporary cement, and addition of small amount of cold cure acrylic resin will restore the occlusion for interim use. So this is the functional check bite impression technique by Getz. So here we combine two techniques, that is the functionally generated path or the functional impression with the check bite impression. Technique, that is matrix impression system proposed by Liverditis. So here it uses a custom matrix to control the sulcular environment and also to deliver impression material to the subgingival parts that has to be impressed. So the system consists of three impression material. First one, a suitable elastomeric semi-rigid material that is required to form the matrix. Then a high viscosity elastomeric impression material which will preferably bond to the matrix forming material, and a stock tray with a medium viscosity elastomeric impression material to pick up the matrix impression. So here you can see in the picture. So A is the matrix impression material, and note that the occlusal surface is untrimmed, that is acting as the stock. So A is the matrix impression material. B, the impression material extrudes out, displacing the air and fluid contaminants from the sulcus, and tray impression material, that is C, which picks up the matrix and also registers the remaining natural teeth. Now this technique overcomes important deficiencies in registration of subgingival margins, gingival retraction and relapse, hemostasis and sulcular cleansing, delivery of impression material subgingivally, strengthening the sulcular flange of the impression, and finally simplification for making complex impression. Now let us see the steps involved in matrix impression system. A clear plastic carrier is made from vacuum forming equipment, and this carrier is used to carry the matrix impression material. So carrier can also be made from wax. Now using this carrier, the matrix is made with polyvinyl siloxane impression material, and once it is set, the matrix is removed and it is adjusted, that is the facial and palatal side of the matrix are trimmed with scalpel, and the interproximal embrasures are enlarged using slender burr or knife edge rubber wheels. Now these black lines on the matrix indicate sulcular extension. Now after adjustment, the matrix is painted with adhesive and then it is filled with high viscosity impression material using the syringe. Okay. Now the matrix impression is seated with light pressure and the matrix impression is made. Now the pickup impression is made using a stock tray with a medium viscosity elastomeric impression material, and the completed impression shows registration of the preparation margins, and the quality and thickness of sulcular flange is also improved due to effective gingival displacement. And also you can see the matrix through the impression material at places which is acceptable because it becomes integral part of the impression. So this is how a matrix impression is made. Coming to the cast impression coping technique. So here, as the name suggests, we make impression with the impression coping, that is made from primary impression. So first of all, an alginate impression is made, and from this a cast coping of 0.7 mm internal space is prepared. Now these impression copings, the buccal surface should be marked properly so that they can be oriented correctly during the impression procedure, and the internal surfaces should be roughened with a coarse diamond. Now once cast copings are prepared, these clean cast copings are tested first to ensure the proper fit and preparation coverage, and then they are filled with light body impression material using an impression syringe and placed carefully on each prepared tooth. Now after this, a pickup impression is made with a stock tray that is filled with heavy body impression material. So this is how a cast coping impression is made, and then this impression is poured with dye stone and further laboratory procedures carried out to fabricate the restorations. The advantages of cast impression coping technique. So first one, recontouring of copings will avoid trauma to the gingival tissues. And here, since it is very small coping, the small bulk of impression material is used and it minimizes the polymerization shrinkage. The intraoral copings also hydraulically displaces air and fluids. And although the cast impression technique requires a second impression appointment because of the laboratory phase, the waiting period results in healthier periodontal tissues and better impressions. And it also negates the need for gingival displacement. And this technique can also be used for full mouth reconstruction procedure. Impression technique, that is the digital impression. So with the techniques of computer aided design and computer aided manufacturing, that is CAD/CAM, being applied in the field of prosthodontics, a concept of intraoral digital impression was put forward in the early 1980s. So these CAD/CAM systems are composed of three major parts. The first one is a data acquisition unit, which collects the data from the region of the prepared teeth and neighboring structures, and then it converts them to virtual impression. Now, second part is the software that designs these virtual restoration anchored in the virtual impressions and setting up all the milling parameters. And the third one is a computerized milling device for manufacturing the restoration with solid blocks of chosen restorative material. So the main digital impression systems that are available in the market include the CEREC, Lava COS system, iTero, E4D, and Trios. So these systems vary from each other in terms of various features like the working principle, the light source, the necessity of powder coat spraying, operating process, and output file format. So this is about the digital impression. We are concluding this session. So the ability to record consistently good impression is both a science and an art. So we have to understand the basic knowledge of various impression material and also their behavior during handling. And this is important for their use in oral environment and clinical success. With the availability of various techniques in advancement, the operator should select a material and technique which best suits for a particular situation. Thus, selection of the material should be done based on the clinical scenario in order to get maximum accurate and dimensionally stable replica of structures that has to be replaced with a prosthesis. These are the references for this session. So thank you all for watching my video. Please do like and share my videos if you are finding these videos useful. And if you have any doubts, queries, or any topic suggestions or any feedbacks, please do comment below the video or you can mail me at this mail ID. So it's a bye from ProstoHub until our next session. Thank you all once again.